part of this week's midseason check-in on the Edmonton Oilers, we welcome on Austin Hockey from YouTube on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. Want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's show, we welcome on Austin Hockey. Austin, my friend, we are at a little bit past the midway season point, but how are you feeling about the Edmonton Oilers so far?
I want to say good because you look at their position in the standings, fourth overall. First in the Pacific, they have that game in hand on Vegas. This is the best position they've been in basically since the 1920 COVID shortened season. And I should be happier than I am. And the main reason why I'm not as happy is because I look at their regulation wins. I look at how the team played heading into this break for the Four Nations. And there's a lot of improvement that needs to happen if they want to perform well in the playoffs, in my opinion.
So it's funny you phrase it that way, because last Friday we did the glass half full, glass half empty, and then yes, there is a glass on the table as the three segments. And the part of my brain that's a sports fan knows you should probably just be grateful the team is winning consistently in the regular season, because there are so many teams that are just miserably hopeless. Like, even if they make the playoffs, they're almost assuredly a first round exit. And then there's the part of my brain that watched the Oilers last year, and they kind of didn't really get going until December-ish was where they really found their groove. And at the same time, I'm sitting here thinking they keep barely beating mediocre teams. Like, you shouldn't need to go to overtime against St. Louis and Chicago, and then you let that game against Detroit slip away where you were in control the whole way. So they're really conflicting, and it's hard to know which to value more.
I completely agree. And you talk about their performance against the more middle of the pack or more mediocre teams. I also look at their performance against the top 10 teams throughout the league. And there's been a lot of discourse surrounding Stuart Skinner's play against top 10 teams. And I think the Oilers only have, or at least Stuart Skinner, I think he's 3-8-2 against top 10 ranked teams this season, with a below 880 save percentage, a negative 10 goals save above expected. Like, that is what concerns me more than the, lower teams in the standings. You want your litmus test teams. You want teams that this team is going to have to beat once the playoff starts. And the fact that they haven't really proven to me that they are capable of maybe winning a 7-game series against them. And it could be another thing too, where I'm just completely overthinking this. Maybe the whole team, they're just focused on the one prize that matters most to them, the one that they were 1 game away from winning last year. Once the playoffs start, you could see this team kick it into another gear. They probably have another gear, is kind of why I'm frustrated, because I know they have that extra gear.
So let me try and put you at ease your concerns there, because that was the framing in the half glass empty conversation of, there's another gear they can get to. On the bright side, there's another gear you can get to. You're not looking at the LA Kings, who are going to be boxed in as, we have to win every single game 3-2 if we want to go anywhere. And they are a very good regular season team, the Kings, for that reason. But we know the playoff environment and what's to be expected of them there. You look at some of the teams in the East, you go from wild card 2 down to like Pittsburgh. If any of those teams has a good week, they're right back in that conversation. But they're going into the playoffs to be cannon fodder against either Florida, Toronto, Carolina, or New Jersey, or Washington for that matter. So there's good and bad, but when the West is the way it is, I definitely understand why the negative voice might be prevailing in your head a little bit.
Yeah. And again, maybe this is something that I fought with, even with my own content and my community that we've grown over on YouTube, is, am I overreacting? Am I seen as too negative sometimes? But you're absolutely right. This team is in a good spot, and they are finding ways to win. Good teams always find ways to win. It doesn't matter how ugly it is. So I'm in one aspect, I'm happy. I also think the decade of darkness just did so much damage to Oilers fans mentally that even when the team is good, we're still just like, are they good though? Like, I don't know.
It's fair, though, because I think about it in the context of some of the other teams we've seen where they've had great regular seasons. You know, that Florida team a couple years ago that won the President's Trophy and didn't really face any adversity in the regular season. They got their teeth punched in the first round. Ditto the Bruins 2 years ago. So I think the fact that they started out the way they did, where, 5-1 through 11, only scoring 2 goals per game, the special teams were entirely broken. The fact they were able to climb out of that ditch shows me they have a little bit of resolve to them, unlike some of the other teams where, the Rangers were in a very similar boat where they came out of the gate okay. They hit their first rough patch of the season and they went 5-15. And because of that, their playoff math is semi-impossible. The Oilers, 5-1, terrible special teams. But they had a chance to climb out of it, and they did. Sometimes you spin your tires in that mud, and this year, and you could say last year too, found a way out. That matters. That does matter that you can respond to adversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw this team respond to adversity during the postseason last year too. The team responds well. Even recently, the last couple of weeks here, the team finds themselves down early in games. I'd like it if they stopped being down early in games, but they do have that level. They do find a way to get back into games, sometimes coming back and even winning in regulation. Sometimes you get an overtime win. Sometimes another team just finds a way to win, like Toronto. You could argue Edmonton played more than good enough to beat Toronto recently in Edmonton. But again, the fact that this team doesn't just roll over. We've seen Oilers teams in the past. They're down early in a game and you can feel the whole team just give up. This team doesn't do that. Doesn't matter who the opponent is. And that's something that is encouraging as we head towards the playoffs, because they're always going to be in every game, no matter what the score is. That you always feel like Edmonton will always find a way to get back in it, or at least make an attempt to come back.
A good example of that is the Pittsburgh game, which they played atrocious in that game, but it was only 3-0. And I was still sitting there like, only takes one, and Pittsburgh is atrocious defensively. And when you have the luxury of running arguably the best 5-man, we need a goal line in the entire sport, it really doesn't ever feel like you're out of it. Of course, you don't want to spam that too much. We've definitely seen a lot more of Connor and Leon together this year than last year. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I'm still trying to work out the math on that. That's one of the things I've really struggled with this year is I don't know if it's good or not that we're in February and they still haven't found the right alignment of 12 forwards they like. I'm still very curious about that.
That is something that I'm glad you did bring up. The lines. Knobloch, he is very, like, once he has lines that he likes, he doesn't like to move away from them. We see that with that third line, the Janmark Henrik Brown line. He likes to play that line a lot. It doesn't matter what the math says, how successful they are, just because they're successful on the penalty kill. It doesn't always translate to 5-on-5, but he likes the way that line plays. And sometimes, I'm big into the analytics side. So for me, I don't like that line, but for coaches, they're doing something that the coach likes and wants. I think, different players have been injured this year. Zach Hyman's missed some time. Victor Arvidsson missed some time. Podkolzin has been great as a complementary player to Draisaitl, but he doesn't have the offense that you would want from your second line. And I think Knobloch, he recognizes that the team does struggle to score sometimes. And I think that's why we're starting to see Draisaitl and McDavid more often together, because I think he's just trying to, I think he wants to push the rest of the group. Like, we can't just keep relying on these two players. What are the rest of you doing when these two are together? I think, yeah.
I definitely feel you on that. We're coming up on our first break here. Didn't mean to cut you off. We'll definitely continue this lineup. We'll definitely continue this lineup conversation because this is the real meat and potatoes. We're getting up to where you have to make the decisions ahead of the trade deadline. Who needs to be added? Who needs to come out? That type of thing. We will be right back after this quick break. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine live bets into a same-game parlay. Whenever my friends and I watch a game together, love to pick something on a squad ride, make the game that much more exciting. The FanDuel app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid out instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. It's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you to everyone who's hanging out on this edition of Locked On Oilers. I want to thank Austin again for his time joining the show. Austin, my friend, we were talking about the lineup and the optimization. I think there is no more interesting player to discuss, and I think he's really a litmus test for how you feel about the team right now than Jeff Skinner, because there are a lot of people, and I assume you are like me, where you want to see him get an extended run in the top six, because that's why he was brought here. You're not getting what what the point of Jeff Skinner as a hockey player is if he's playing 12 minutes a night on the third or fourth line. That's not tapping into his game.
I completely agree. And there's maybe something to be said about Chris Knobloch making sure that if you're on his team, you are playing his system and you are committed to the play away from the puck. And if it takes a little while to get that player to not only be bought in, but be able to execute whatever Knobloch needs him to before he gets elevated, I'm okay with that. Obviously, as a fan, a lot of overreactions, wanted to see him up the lineup much sooner. But he finally gets a look in that Chicago game with Draisaitl, and he's instrumental in that team, scoring a couple in the third period, especially when he stripped the puck off of Chicago's breakout, fed Draisaitl. Draisaitl scores, makes it 3-1 Edmonton. What is frustrating for me as a fan is knowing that Jeff Skinner has put in the work for the defensive side. You see him producing goals, assists, and he's playing well overall. And then you have that game against Colorado where the team needs a goal late in the third, 5 minutes left after they gave up the fifth goal, and Jeff Skinner doesn't see the ice. And that's what frustrates me, because I don't understand why you wouldn't try and get him out there to push and score. And I think he only played 12 minutes against Colorado too. And, there was a lot of talk pre-game about Jeff Skinner earning that top six ice time, and then he just wasn't given that ice time. Even on the power play, top unit goes out, they lay an absolute egg, Bouchard with the giveaway, and then Colorado scores shorthanded, Cale Makar. Second unit goes out, Jeff Skinner sets up Corey Perry. They get that goal right back. And then when the Oilers get their next power play, it's the first unit right back out. And that's frustrating to me. I want to see players like Jeff Skinner rewarded, because they are playing in a way where, at least if I was a coach, I would be rewarding them.
As far as the optimization of the lineup, where are you at with where to use Nugent-Hopkins? Because that's something I really haven't felt, especially at 5-on-5. It hasn't looked right. His numbers are fine, 15 goals, I think 20 assists. He looks fine on paper, but it just feels like he hasn't fit necessarily on McDavid's wing or as the third line center.
Yeah, if you want offense, or if you want him to contribute positively to offense, he's best suited as a winger.
Yeah.
And he's best suited as a winger, likely next to Connor McDavid. I don't know what the analytics look like off the top of my head with him and Draisaitl. I feel like Nuge and Draisaitl haven't really worked well together. Nuge and McDavid have played a lot of ice time together over the last couple of years. So there's a comfort level there with those players. If you have Nugent-Hopkins in a third line center role, he's not great on face-offs, and he doesn't play a grinding style where that you expect your third line to play hard along the boards. That's just not what Nugent-Hopkins does. And you'd like, obviously, in a perfect world, every single line can score goals. Yeah. Nugent-Hopkins, he has good instincts. He's a smart player. He's good away from the puck. But at this point in his career, yeah, if you want offense, he's definitely a winger now, and you have to play him with skill players.
Big picture, you mentioned offense there as far as pushing for offense. And I know the defense has been great this year, but looking at the raw goal totals, it kind of feels like they're missing something here. Last year you had Hyman have a career year. You knew he wasn't going to replicate that, but it feels like, they're going to finish, I want to say 10, 15 goals off their pace from last year. And yeah, Evander Kane, the Fogle to Arvidsson drop off probably a little bit more than you expected. But it feels like for a team that's this good, it shouldn't just be the goal distribution needs to be a little more even throughout the lineup.
I agree. Obviously, Arvidsson was hurt, so he's still trying to find his game, but I think they were hoping he could come in and pop about 20, 25 for them in an optimal world. Jeff Skinner, another player that you would hope could score 20, 25. There's just a few players on this team that haven't hit that gear or haven't produced the way we were hoping. Connor Brown recently went 13 games without a goal. And again, you don't expect him to score 20 goals at this point in his career. He only scored a couple last year, but he has the offense to do it. He was producing earlier in the season. And I think a lot of this comes down to the power play as well. Yeah. The power play, it's hot and cold. When it's hot, it's hot. And when it's cold, they look awful. And the power play isn't clicking the way it was before. Even with Zach Hyman's regression, you'd think Draisaitl and McDavid would, offset that on the power play. But even Draisaitl, he's scoring mostly at even strength this season. He's not producing as much or at the same rate that he used to on the power play.
It's crazy that I've said that to more than one of my friends that, Leon probably has a little more to give on the power play. And they look at me like I have three heads because he's leading the league in goals. And I think he's still in the lead for points after yesterday's games. But it feels like he's gotten unlucky. It feels like he's missed more than one wide open net. It feels like he's hit a couple posts. And if the best player in the league at the moment in terms of the goals and probably the Hart Trophy frontrunner has more to give, I think that's another tick in the column of reasons to be optimistic.
That's a good point. Because if Draisaitl has another level of hit, if that power play can hit another level, we've seen it. I don't expect it to be at 35% like it was under Jay Woodcroft's Oilers. It was just historical and outrageous to watch. But even during the postseason, the power play was incredible during the playoffs under Chris Knobloch and Glenn Gulletson. So obviously teams, they make adjustments. Teams heavily scout the Oilers. Every team wants to beat the Oilers because we are that litmus test for a lot of the rest of this league. And the Oilers power play sometimes doesn't look like they're adjusting on the fly or adjusting where they need to. It's the same formation. It's the same. Try and get it to McDavid. Try and get the pass to Draisaitl. If it doesn't work, defer to Bouchard for a point shot. And even Bouchard, he doesn't have a single goal on the power play this year, which is wild to think about considering his shot and his ability. But that's another reason why you can, argue that goals are down for Edmonton this year is Bouchard's not producing on the power play either.
It's interesting. The conversation around Bouchard is another one of those litmus tests where it really tells me a lot about what you think about hockey based on where you're at with him. And I did an episode about defense earlier today, and the main point I wanted to make with Bouchard that I think people need to hear is he has the puck so much on offense that he is not in a lot of defensive situations overall, but in the situations where he is in a raw defensive situation, he has to play active defense. And we know, he's not big, he's not strong, he's a smarts guy, he's a positioning guy. So when you have fewer overall chances against him, those chances seem more pronounced because those are, he only has to make 7-8 defensive plays a game. 2 good chances out of 8 isn't a lot, but anecdotally, it feels like a lot.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times too is because the team gets down early in games. Yeah. Every mistake, when you're down by 1 or 2 goals after the first period, if you make one mistake, you're already down. The fans, they're already honing in on different things to look at. That's just how we are when we're analyzing. And if you're already down a goal or 2, you're already pushing for offense. When you make that one mistake, again, like you said, it's just amplified even more. And Bouchard's out there a lot to try and create offense when the team is down. So he will be out there when a mistake is made. Nobody plays perfect hockey, but Evan Bouchard is a player that what he does positively way, way outweighs the negative, in my opinion.
Completely agreed with you. We're going to take our second and final break. When we come back, a little more Bouchard. We'll talk a little McDavid and a tinge of Four Nations right after this. Thank you to everyone hanging out here with Austin and I on this edition of Locked On Oilers. Continuing on the Bouchard conversation, first of all, do you think reasonable not on the Four Nations roster?
I think it's reasonable if you're looking at it from a Hockey Canada perspective. They like their player types. They like defensemen that maybe use their size a bit more. Bouchard's not small, but he doesn't use his size in a way that Hockey Canada likes to have. Like, the fact Drew Doughty has only played 5 or 6 games all year and he's named as the replacement for Pietrangelo, that shows the type of player that Hockey Canada prefers. And that's not Bouchard's style. And that's not a knock on Bouchard. That's not really a knock on Doughty either. That's just a Hockey Canada perspective. For me as a fan, the more time you have the puck, the less time you're in your own zone, and the more you're going towards the offensive zone. That's a good thing. And I think Evan Bouchard likely, based on the other defensemen that they named, Bouchard is better than, I'd say, at least 3-4 of those D-men. No, and again, this is no disrespect to who was named to Team Canada. That's just my thoughts on that.
Bouchard was lights out in the playoffs last year. That really kind of showed me, okay, he's on that tier. And this is probably the worst time in the world to be a great offensive defenseman because there's 10 of them now. You know, if Evan Bouchard played 10 years ago, he's probably a Norris guy. This year, now in today's landscape, with Hughes and Fox and McCarr and Heiskanen and McAvoy, it is such a crowded landscape that a guy like Bouchard kind of seems like a luxury for Team Canada, where it's like, we could bring him to be the power play specialist if we really wanted to. And instead they opted for guys like Sanheim, which, like you said, functional size as opposed to speciality. Okay, opening it up a little bit more, talking McDavid, that of it all. I was having a conversation with one of my friends who's a casual hockey fan over the weekend, and he's like, is McDavid still really good? And I was like, yeah. He's like, I don't really feel like I see enough about him. And again, this is the American hockey fan and the casual hockey fan. And I try, and every time we hang out on a weekend and I can throw the Oiler game on in the background while we're doing things, always try and point it out at the TV. And that is the easiest guy to get people convinced that hockey is cool. That is the easiest person. Of the goal he scored against the Rangers, where he went through all 5 guys, happened while we were doing this. And mind-blowingly, I want him to, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, but I want him to get the props he deserves. Because like, we sickos know, who watch every single Oiler game, but I feel like he should win the MVP every single year. And he won't, because people, you know, they get bored. Same reason LeBron doesn't. But I feel like McDavid is underrated, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, you can make the argument. Absolutely. Maybe this season, you know, being overshadowed by his teammate with Leon. But you know, a lot of fans like myself, I mean, I have like 5 Leon Draisaitl jerseys behind me. We've understood that Leon can elevate his game. And and he used to be frustrating to watch, some of the giveaways, and you know, it looks lazy. But you had that Malkin factor in Pittsburgh too, where they're so good and sometimes it looks lazy, but it's really not. These players are so special. And when you talk about McDavid, he's just on another level. Mentally, physically, the way he sees the ice, the way he moves on the ice with the puck with full speed. We see Janmark with these speed bursts, but when he has the puck on his stick, it's bobbling everywhere. He loses it. He's checked off of it. You don't get that with players like McDavid because they're just a step above the rest of the league. And in a league where things have trended towards the speed and skill a lot more over the last 10 years, the fact McDavid is still that far ahead, in my opinion, of the rest of the field, it might not show in the points, especially this season, but that just shows how special he is. And the fact that he can be 10 points behind his teammate Draisaitl, and we're still talking about McDavid being the better player, that's a testament to how good McDavid is.
So what do you think clicked for Leon? Because like, obviously this is a great player. We all know this. Easily a top 10 player. If you want to be even like the most dismissive as possible, this is one of the 10 best players in the world, but it just looks different this year. Do you really think it's as simple as they gave him a forechecker who just gets him the puck like a vacuum in Podkolzin? Because like, that's really all I got. Other than that, it's not that different.
I think there's a combination. I think having a pure checker on his line that can retrieve pucks has been instrumental in allowing the team to keep that offensive zone pressure. They're not defending as much. But when they do have to defend, you see the way Draisaitl back checks. You see the way he can strip pucks. We saw that during the 4-on-4 against Colorado before he tied it up 4-4 when he scored from his knees. The defensive play he made first, they go up 200 feet and then he's able to score because of that defensive play in his own zone. The third game of the season, Draisaitl was benched briefly by Knoblauch. He was benched for a few shifts because Knoblauch wasn't happy with his play in his own zone. And I think that just lit something in Draisaitl, lit a fire under his butt. And again, you got to give Knoblauch credit. He's able to find ways to get his players to buy into the system and style that he expects. Not that he wants, he expects these players to play this way. It doesn't matter if you're McDavid, Draisaitl, or even a Jeff Skinner right now. He will hold you accountable. And Draisaitl was held accountable. And I think that moment, third game of the season, I think it was against Calgary, hasn't looked back. Has not looked back. He has just been on another level, especially when it comes to his back checking. This is it's the best I've seen this guy play in his whole career so far.
And that's saying something, because this is a guy who's already won an MVP, who's had 50 goals a couple times. As far as the big picture, talking about the team, I look at the lineup. The defense still worries me. I know the defense has been good this year, but going into a playoff series with the perspective of Klingberg's played 5 games this year, I don't think he's been good or bad. I think he's very much just trying to get his feet under him right now. So I'm giving him the patience and grace. But Emberson coming into this year had 27 career NHL games, and he's been fine. NHL teams don't win Stanley Cups with guys who don't have experience. You know, you go and look through just the teams that make the finals. Like Broberg was an extreme outlier as far as experience for a guy. The only person who comes to mind, I did something about this a few weeks ago, who had less than like 200 games on a cup team was Bowen Byram. He was like a 4th overall pick and on a great team where he wasn't playing a big role. I just feel like this group is one guy short on the back end. I don't know who gets bumped out, but it definitely feels like they need one more guy who has more experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's tough because it's their left shot D-man depth that is rough right now. You know, Ekholm didn't play against Toronto. You don't have another left shot option. Your number one left shot call-up option is Cam Dineen from Bakersfield. And then if Klingberg can't handle tougher minutes or playoff minutes, like you said, he's trying to just get into the swing of things. He didn't get a training camp. He looks a little awkward out there. I don't know if the skating is because he is trying to get his footing back or if it is related to the procedures he had done with his hips. Something's off with Klingberg. He hasn't been bad, hasn't been good, but he will get exposed at the current level that he's at. This team, optimally, you likely need another right shot D and a left shot D. And then, like you said, who do you bump out of the lineup? And Stetcher is fine. I don't think Stetcher is your answer in a top 4 role, but he's fine when he's called upon. And when push comes to shove, Edmonton, let's just pretend if the playoffs started today, they're going up against the Colorado Avalanche. Do they have defenders that can keep up with Colorado's speed? Do they have defenders where if there's an injury, can you reliably call upon someone to come in and try and shut down a McKinnon? And if you talk about experience, maybe they're just hoping that Ekholm, Bouchard, and Darnell Nurse's experience is enough.
I was kind of surprised they just threw Klingberg into the fire, 17, 18 minutes out of the gate when they've been really massaging the minutes of whoever the 6th defenseman is. Stetcher's only averaging 13 some odd minutes a game. Kulak's up almost 2.5 minutes from last year to kind of mitigate that. Emberson's 14, 15 minutes. A good 2 or 3 of those are on the kill. I was kind of surprised they just threw Klingberg right into the fire of you're playing with Nurse, you're getting 17, 18 minutes, and we're going to figure this out.
Yeah, that was also very surprising. Now, I don't know how it works when you want to send a guy down for
conditioning,
conditioning stints. I don't know how that works. I don't know if he would have been eligible for a conditioning stint in the AHL. But again, if they're trying to figure out what they have and what they need, I guess the only way to know is throwing them into that fire and you go, okay, he couldn't handle it. Now we have to address this position specifically. I think that's what the logic is with the team. They wanted to get ahead of it weeks before the March 7th trade deadline, and this gives them enough time to figure that out.
All right, the last thing I want to touch on before we get out of here, I continuously, maybe stupidly, defend Stuart Skinner for what he is because I think he's a slightly above average goalie. I think every now and then he can be a good goalie. I think he is right at that threshold of capable of winning a Stanley Cup where you point to guys like Kemper and Aiden Hill and Binnington. I think he can be in that tier of guy. They don't pay a lot for goaltending. They get what they pay for. I feel like the conversation of, well, he's not good enough. Well, if you want a better goalie, you have to pay for one. And there aren't a lot of goalies out there worth paying. So you're kind of better off spending, the difference between Skinner and that next tier up of goalie on another defender or a Jeff Skinner type player, that $3 million. And there's no right answer here because roster building isn't a science, but I feel like the conversation around Skinner kind of gets muddled.
I agree to an extent, especially when you talk about the cap hit allocation to their goaltending. I think what gets a lot of fans intense about this position specifically is that you look at a team like Toronto, and this is an outlier, but I'm just referencing Toronto's goaltending. They pay a combined $1.5 million for Wall and Stolarz, and those two goaltenders are top 10 in goal save above expected. They're in the top 15 in save percentage. So you can look at different teams. They spend less in certain areas, but they're getting more bang for their buck. And I think fans just want a little bit more bang for their buck when it comes to Stuart Skinner. I love Stu. I love him to death. I have a Stuart Skinner hockey card that is always in the background on my desk during streams and videos. I want him to win a cup with the Oilers. When I talk about this team maybe going and upgrading a net, I'm not talking about trading Skinner. I'm just talking about someone that can come in, maybe mentor him and be a support where if he struggles in the playoffs, which he could, 2 playoffs in a row, it didn't look great. And he found his game against Dallas, which was awesome. And I would argue most of the losses against Florida weren't entirely on him. Can you win a cup? Yes. Should they prioritize spending some money towards a goaltender, considering how strong of team defense they do play systematically? I would also say yes. I think if you just have another option that you can be comfortable going to. And no disrespect to Calvin Pickard either. He's done his job as a backup. But yeah, it's a tough league. Teams are ruthless. Look at Vegas. They're ruthless. They have no allegiance to players that they bring in. It's if you're not helping us win a cup right now, you're out the door and we're bringing someone else in. There's a personal level to it. As a GM, I don't know if I would be that ruthless, but I think you have to look at it in terms of where McDavid is in his career. And we're in year 10 of McDavid. He should have a cup by now. I would be doing everything I could to make sure he does get one.
Okay, you brought that up. I was going to end on Skinner, but that's a good conversation point. I do find interesting because this is the last cheap year, relatively speaking, of McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard in terms of the overall cap landscape. And the system's about to get really funky, and some of these deals are going to look really good versus really bad in really short order. How do you feel about the Oilers' ability to maintain around those 3 guys going forward? Because beyond those 3 guys, there's not a lot of long-term commitments here. Nuge a couple years, Hyman a couple years, but Ekholm a couple years. But beyond that, it's a lot of interchangeable parts. And the Oilers are in a position where they very easily could make this a great situation and continue rotating through guys as they age out trying to chase cups. Or this could go really badly and end up like the 2003 Rangers, where you end up with the end of Eric Lindros, Pavel Bure, and Mark Messier all on the same team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, Bouchard, McDavid, their raises are coming soon. Draisaitl, his raise kicks in next season. I think with how much the cap is projected to go up, they have a real good opportunity if they're smart about it. If Stan Bowman and Jeff Jackson are smart about this, they're going to be able to fit pieces back in for relatively cheap and still pay their big players. And like you mentioned with contract structures, with the cap going up so much, some of this stuff is going to look silly. You might have contracts where players are deferring money like we're seeing in the MLB lately. You don't know what that's going to look like. But the Oilers, they have an owner that will spend to the cap no matter what because he wants to see this team win. And we're lucky to have an owner like that, despite, can have our opinions about the Oilers owner, Dale Cates. But the fact he's willing to spend to the cap, whatever the number gets to in 2, 3, 4 years from now, knowing that makes me feel better. However, it's their current GM and Stan Bowman. You saw the end of his tenure in Chicago, not managing that cap well. How is he going to manage the cap with these players now? And like you said, this is the year where if you're going to go all in and make your big moves and try and shore up the positions that you need shored up, and maybe even bring someone in with term, that's an option that they have to seriously consider.
Thank you so much for your time, Austin. Tell the people where they can find you.
Y'all can find me just on YouTube, Austin Hockey, or at ahockey1993. I do mostly daily Oilers content. So thank you so much for having me, Nick. I truly appreciate it.
Of course, man. Anytime you can talk puck with someone and you're not talking to yourself into a camera, it makes this job a lot easier. So greatly appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thank you.